Welcome to the Taoism Channel podcast. My name is Matt, and this podcast will cover free will versus determinism. If this is the first video you've seen on the Taoism Channel, it may be best to pause here and review the epistemology video first. The first 5 podcasts will be epistemology, free will, this podcast, morality, law and government, and economics. I covered epistemology, or the theory of knowledge, in my last podcast, in which I redefine knowledge as verified true belief to replace the classical model of justified true belief. As in the epistemology podcast, you'll notice the consistent theme of basing each philosophical position in the commonly shared, real, objective universe we all share. Given the novelty and building coherence of many of my positions, I hope to receive enough feedback to have an AMA as podcast number 6 for those who contribute on Patreon. I may then start to bring others into the discussion on later podcasts. Please donate if this content makes you think. That's patreon.com/Taoism channel. Let's get right into it. Free will. Does it exist? You probably feel that it does. You've likely heard the argument that free will is necessary to morality. It's true that free will is necessary to agency, necessary to true moral activity in the world. But isn't science seemingly verifying a much more deterministic reality? In a fully deterministic world where you would have no choice, where you are fated to take certain actions, who would ever go to prison? Perhaps there is actually a point where determinism and free will meet. This is where Taoism always stands, between all things, order and chaos, hard and soft, ruled and ruler. This is why we'll cover the mystery of free will versus determinism now, to lay the groundwork for morality in the next podcast. As always, let's look for what is true instead of what we need to be true. Sometimes we get lucky and those turn out to be one and the same. By analyzing our current understanding of determinism and free will, we can reassemble what we find to form a better model. We should start, however, by clearly defining what we know about each. Determinism is the doctrine that all events, including human action, are ultimately determined by causes external to the will. Some philosophers have taken determinism to imply that individual human beings have no free will and cannot be held morally responsible for their actions. Sam Harris describes free will as the belief that you could not have done otherwise. If free will is defined that way, then I do not blame Sam for disagreeing. To start, let's agree that in a material universe, the brain exists as a material object, all biochemistry and electromagnetics, so it is a part of an admittedly deterministic universe of stars and planets, but are you able to do anything different than a small asteroid might do, and why? It occurred to me that there are actually 2 things going on within determinism. There is what I'll call fixed determinism, or time, and flexible determinism, which includes your gut biome, your genes, your economy, sociocultural influences, your religion, and so on. Without separating the two, it's nearly impossible to proceed to free will. Fixed determinism is that thing Sam Harris seems to claim mainly contradicts free will, the idea that you could not have done otherwise. This is the main thrust of his argument, an argument, he says, that is sufficient to disprove free will. Fixed determinism is essentially time. Critically, he does mention other factors as well, though, part of what I'll call flexible determinism. This is curious since he already claims that a person could not have done otherwise, full stop. That offers a unitary explanation of the range of options, of which there are none, so why mention limitations beyond 100%? He correctly sees such things as religion as additional limiting factors. But think about this. Why would one assume that additional limiting factors, combined with not having been able to do otherwise, should always equal an exactly 100% deterministic universe? Either not being able to go back and choose otherwise is enough to negate free will, or there is some need to close off any other avenues. But that begs the question, why would Sam assume that combination of those factors entirely forecloses any other possibilities, no matter the exact combination? When considering the limitation of time, you could theoretically still make a different choice. You just need information. For instance, using a time machine, as an admittedly unrealistic example, you could go back and talk to yourself about your choices and deliberate on choosing otherwise. So even hard determinism, or as I call it, fixed determinism, could be defeated, given enough information. However, saying that you could not have done otherwise is not an accurate measure to begin with. Of course you couldn't. Of course every atom put back in the same place would produce the same result. If fixed determinism is another way of saying time, then consider that you only get one moment per moment, one choice per choice. It's a tautology. The error when thinking of time comes about because we are conflating what we can do in the present or future with what we can do or what can be done in the past, which is to say, nothing different. This is essentially the same kind of error I found when thinking about epistemology in the previous podcast. The commonly understood definition of determinism is a lagging indicator, not a leading one. The only reason you can't make a different choice using a particular moment is that you were only given that moment. Anyway, you don't need to make a different choice to prove free will. You only need to make a choice in that moment. The admission that a choice was made is a de facto admission of free will. Rocks can't make choices. We could predict the path of an asteroid, but not the exact path of one's footsteps throughout a single day. Flexible determinism is an assortment of factors that control or influence you. Some factors seem a bit harder or softer, like genes versus your gut biome. Others vary widely, such as economy, religion, or sociocultural influences. These factors eat up a lot of the freedom that fixed determinism hasn't already. The difference is, no matter how difficult overcoming these factors seems, they will yield to sufficient knowledge and will. Going vegan, for instance, for 2 weeks will kill off the gut bacteria that crave meat. Now, free will is made of two parts: freedom of motion through emptiness and consciousness. A real and observable universe is required as a prerequisite, so there is space-time to move within and something for the consciousness to observe and act upon. What agency would there be without a real movable agent who could observe and act? Let's cover time first, then space. Time is simply an arrow flowing in one direction. If time stopped flowing, all movement would cease, down to the last atom. So perhaps it's easiest to think of time as the consistent passage of free motion. Space. The Tao says, we might regard all things to have value, but it is nothingness that provides the utility. The Epicurean Titus Lucretius Carus put it this way: all nature of itself has consisted and consists of two parts, for there are bodily substances and vacant space in which these substances are situated, in which they are moved in different directions. To proceed then, if there were no place and no space, which we call vacant, bodies could not be situated anywhere, nor could at all move anywhither in different directions. So time can be thought of as freedom of motion, and space can be thought of as freedom of emptiness. Free will also requires consciousness. Consciousness can be defined as awareness of one's own existence, sensations, thoughts, surroundings, and so on. This awareness requires the senses. Without a means of awareness and perception, there can be no free will. As a thought experiment, imagine a human baby born without all senses. Would it have free will? Nature provides the unfortunate answer to this question in the form of anencephaly. Children born with this disorder usually only lack a telencephalon, the largest part of the brain, consisting mainly of the cerebral hemispheres, including the neocortex, which is responsible for cognition. The National Institute for Neurological Disorders and Stroke, NINDS, describes this condition as follows: a baby born with anencephaly is usually blind, deaf, unaware of its surroundings, and unable to feel pain. Although some individuals with anencephaly may be born with a main brain stem, the lack of a functioning cerebrum permanently rules out the possibility of ever gaining awareness of their surroundings. With very few exceptions, Infants born with this disorder do not survive longer than a few hours or possibly few days after their birth. So consciousness and life itself requires the ability to observe. The ability to observe, retain, and judge information allows the ability to perceive and react. When the basis for observing, retaining, and judging information can be improved, that increases free will. An increase in available information also means increased free will. The amount of available free will is variable and shifting according to the amount of flexible determinism acting upon you. This does not mean you can't accomplish a certain goal, for example. It just means that a higher degree of constraint by flexible determinism makes achieving that goal more difficult. Studying as many subjects as possible while keeping an open mind is a path to improve your odds when seeking to make an informed, free decision based on what is true. Taoism seeks to maximize actions that are in accordance with the Tao, which is to say, in accordance with all true things simultaneously. So increased freedom comes from better understanding. I hope this podcast has shown that there is room for free will in a deterministic universe. Next time I'll cover morality, which will only build on these ideas. Thanks for listening. Until next time.